My name's Linda Campbell. I joined the U.S. Air Force in 1968. I was the only female officer in the state, Army or Air. I grew up here in Portland, Oregon. My life suddenly took a turn when I was 16, when a girl kissed me. I knew that after college I would have to stop being gay. I needed to get serious. There were a lot more men in the military than women, and I thought, if there were that many men, surely there would be one for me.
I'm Geraldine O'Brien. I served in both the Army and the Coast Guard for a total of 23 years. I think I was about 5 years old when my father first caught me wearing my sister's clothes. And the big thing I remember from that was not to get caught again. I didn't know exactly why I did it. It's just not something you knew about in Oklahoma. I felt like I wanted to put all that behind me. And I felt like joining the Army was the giant purge.
My name is Monica Ham, and I was a personnel officer in the United States Air Force, promoted to the rank of captain. I served as an officer in the United States Coast Guard. I feel like when I showed up in my military day, I had to hide a huge part of me, the confident, proud, lesbian, Monica Ham that I bring everywhere else I go, but I wasn't able to bring all of me to work every day. Who knows what I could have achieved in the military if I had been allowed to serve openly as a lesbian.
My name's Landon Shemek. I am a sergeant in the Army Reserves, and I've served a little over 6 years now. Coming out for me was a three-stage process. At first I thought I was bisexual, then I thought I was lesbian, and then I discovered who I truly was actually not a woman at all, it was a male, and so transgender. So I came out 3 different times, and each time you think it would get easier, and it just got harder.
My name is Lindsay Earl Polk. I joined the military the 9th of December of 1979 in Seattle, Washington. The official title of what I did in the military, the Navy, was a mess specialist, i.e. I was a cook. I was homeless and on my ass. I joined drunk. There was no great love for this country. There was no, my back was up against the wall.
There were no protections back then. Women had no rights. My first class was put on by Maybelline because they wanted all of the women to know how to properly apply makeup. My first duty assignment when I went to check in with my boss, I reported in, Lieutenant Campbell reporting as ordered, sir. He said, I don't like you. Women don't belong in the military. Women belong at home, cooking for their husbands and having children. I'm going to get rid of you as soon as I possibly can. That will be all. Yes, sir. I was constantly aware that I had to hide who I was. I went to then my personnel school, And at the end of the personnel school, we graduated and we did what all graduating classes do. We went to the NCO club and drank beer. And the fellow across from me looked very sober, unhappy. And I said, "Sergeant," I said, "drink up, we just graduated. Come on, this is a happy occasion." And he said, "Lieutenant, I don't think you're as gay and happy as you appear to be." He's got to be at least 40, so he's an old guy. And gay is a very secret word. Nobody knows that word, just us. So I said, "Sergeant, I am gay. I am happy. You should be too. Come on, drink up." Well, he kept repeating this all night long. And finally, at 5 o'clock in the morning, we are standing in the breakfast line. And he said it again. He said, "Lieutenant, you're not as gay and happy as you appear to be." And of course, at this point, I didn't appear to be gay or happy. And I just said, "Sergeant, I wish you would stop saying that." And he said, "Oh, is that the problem?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, I thought so." And he told me that he was an OSI officer, Office of Special Investigation, and it was his job to root out homosexuals and get them thrown out of the military. But that the last person he outed had been a pilot who, when confronted, committed suicide. And he just could no longer do this work. And he wanted to warn me what I could and couldn't do to stay safe in the military. He said, "If you have anything incriminating at all, a letter, a picture, anything at all, you need to get rid of it. But don't throw it away and don't flush it down the toilet because we will get it." He said, "Burn it. Your friends cannot call you. You can call them. You must always use a payphone and never the same one twice. You can write to your friends. They cannot write to you. We can read your mail. Your friends cannot come and visit you. That would send up a red flag. You can probably visit them. Chances are we won't follow you. Hope it all goes well." And that was the end of that conversation. But here I thought I was so smart. They're not going to catch me. I can hide for 4 years. This man, whose job it was to out homosexuals, took less than 10 hours, and he had me dead to rights. That was really, really scary.
I was proud to be serving in the military. You know, I grew up poor in the South and always strived to make it. I met my first girlfriend on college break, and that was the first time I really absolutely knew I was a lesbian. And from that moment on, I felt that I finally got it. And I was so proud and happy. At that same time, I was actually investigated for being gay in ROTC in college. I was asked officially, "Are you a lesbian? You realize you cannot be." My whole future flashed in front of me, and I felt like it could have been over, and the only way I knew to handle it was to deny. I denied being gay for the first time officially at age 21. I was able to serve proudly as an officer in California, and then I was transferred to Guam. During that time, there was always the threat of being found out or being investigated for being gay, and as an officer, I was expected to lead by example. At that time, they were doing witch hunts. The investigators would go out and take pictures of people who were out, whatever events we were going to, write down license plates, and conduct actual investigations. And the outcome could be a bad or a negative discharge, which meant that you could not get benefits that military members could get, such as education or home loans, or you could receive a discharge, a negative discharge, or even be incarcerated. So these fears and threats were a part of my military life. I will say in my heart is I never felt like I did anything wrong. And so at the time when I was investigated in the Air Force, I was a captain at the time. I was stationed in Miami, Florida, and I was shocked to be called in by Air Force Office of Special Investigations investigators who read my rights to me as I had violated the law. So at that time, of course, I denied that I was a lesbian, and fortunately, the investigators did not acquire enough information to further pursue or prosecute me. When I was cleared, I resigned from the Air Force and received an honorable discharge. And at that same time in my life, that was June of 1990, I was offered an opportunity to become an officer in the United States Coast Guard. And I felt that could be an opportunity to go to a smaller service and maybe be able to serve without being persecuted or investigated or found out for being gay. It was difficult to be able to serve over men that were on my team that could make fun or tell gay jokes, and I could not say anything. When I'd gotten to the point that I knew I couldn't live that life anymore of living a lie or not being my true self, I chose to go to my commanding officers and say I can no longer serve and have my gays and lesbians made fun of or persecuted. It was the time because in my heart and in my world, I had had enough. I want to serve, but it's more important to be free, to be me. So Coast Guard headquarters made a decision that I could be discharged honorably, but that on my DD-214, the narrative would read, admitted homosexual, failure to conform to accepted standards of military behavior. I knew I would have to start over. I was fortunate enough that the character of my discharge would be honorable, but the negative aspect was the words that were used and the negative discharge code, which essentially sums up your career. I want to be one of the first to have the character of my discharge changed from the negative to positive, which is how I characterize my service in the United States military. Thankfully, the time has come that we can do that now, and I want to assist in any way to find people who may have gone back to the small towns in North Carolina or Eastern Oregon that may not even know that they have the opportunity now, and they don't have to live in fear or in hiding anymore, that they can stand up proud and hold their DD-214, get their VA benefits, their home loans, their education benefits, and that fortunately the times have changed and they can be proud of their military service.
I had a rabbit jacket on, a paisley shirt, some velour pants, and some brown knee boots, and walked in the Marine recruiter's office and put my hands on my hips and said, I want to be a Marine. And one asked me, do you know what a blanket party is? He says, that's where the people in your troop, or whatever they call the Marines, your company, wait till you fall asleep. And they wrap a blanket around your midriff, your midsection, and beat the shit out of you. And he said, if you join the military, he said, I see a lot of those in your future. He said, I suggest you go to a lesser service. So I walked across the hallway and I joined the Navy. On the application to join the military, at the bottom, they said, you have homosexual tendencies. I said, yes. The man looked at me and said, you can go. Because they were snatching brothers off of corners and sending them off to Vietnam. However, Nixon did away with the draft in 1973, and all of those records were done away with. This time when I filled it out, do you have homosexual tendencies? I said no. And I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what lay ahead of me, but I just took it day by day. No one ever confronted me about my homosexuality. No one ever came up to me and said, Lindsay, are you a fag? When I would walk by, they would call me a fag or a sissy behind my back. This fellow came to my rack and said that Smitty wanted me to come back there and suck his dick. And I said, you tell Smitty to kiss my ass. Well, come to find out, Smitty was an NIS agent. They put the fellow who asked me that out, but I stayed in. But they never followed me up to New York. Had they followed me up to New York, they could see the places that I'd gone to. And I just go up there and just have sex for 4 or 5 days and come back and get back to work. To be gay, you can't be weak. That's an oxymoron. They put gays are weak. No, we aren't weak. You have to be strong. But if you couple that with being black, that's an added albatross around your neck. I don't know any gay person over the age of 10 who's weak. And if you're black, it's 6. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, which is south of Chicago. My early childhood was idyllic until maybe 8 or 9, when it was evident to everyone that I was a sissy. School was horrible. I was raped. I was beaten. I couldn't worry about good grades. I was worried about how to stay alive. When school was out at 3:20 in the afternoon, at 3 o'clock, I'm figuring out what escape route am I going to take to get home. I was a fag. Anything bad that happened to me should have happened. I was beaten in front of my daddy. And I crawled up the steps and Daddy closed the door on me. And that's when I finally realized that I was in this all by myself. When my daddy found out I was gay, he found some naked pictures of men under my mattress. He told me that I would live to be 40. Cortisol ran through my veins for years. My daddy hated what I was. And I'm lucky I came out of it alive. But in 2001, our last conversation we had before Alzheimer's had begun to take its toll, he looked at me, he said, Lindsay, I said, what, Daddy? He said, you know, you survived the flood. I said, Daddy, you're right. I would.
If I'd been allowed to transition while on active duty, it would have changed my leadership style because I was afraid. I was afraid of being found out. And I didn't even know what I was afraid of being found out about. I didn't feel gay. I didn't know what trans was. I just knew that I was definitely not, I was not in the mold that the military would prefer. In the Army, you just didn't talk about anything like that. Those were the epithets that were used against you. I mean, when you first got off the bus at boot camp, they called you ladies and girls, but you know, I was 6'5". I'm a big person. Everybody assumes I'm a guy. So it wasn't hard to pass for me. I had a large collection of stuff, a large collection of women's clothing. When I went in the military, it all went in the trash. Because you can't have that in the military. It wasn't 2 weeks after being out of boot camp that I wasn't collecting stuff again. So it was kept in my car. I struggled with thinking about it too much versus just not thinking about it. And once I got in the Coast Guard, on a ship, you don't have to think about it. Everybody's wearing the same clothes. Everybody's doing the same job. For me, it was a comfortable feeling of camaraderie. The Coast Guard was very good to me, and I loved my service, rescuing people, pulling people out of the water, being part of a team that was pulling people out of the water is probably the most amazing thing I ever got to do. So I got transferred down to Newport, Oregon, and that was my first small boat station. Station life is different than anything else before. There was enough freedom on my days off, and I started feeling more or less comfortable with myself. I was exploring the communities around Newport. I went down to Waldport, and there was a bookshop, and they had a queer section, and I was kind of like, wow. So I would keep it hidden, kind of exploring myself a little more. During that time, my wife knew about my cross-dressing, and I didn't have the language or the understanding of myself to actually truly come out to her. It didn't hit me until I was out of the military and I was working for the Navy, of all things. That's when I first started exploring a different identity. I made an email address with Geraldine as the name. So I was online basically as a woman, and it was very comforting. Once I was free of the military's constraints, just started feeling decompressing from being in the military. I started feeling less and less able to deal with the fairly masculine stuff going on at work. It was a ship without any women on it. There was a lot of misogyny, and it was much more oppressive. I had really funky ideas about how to fit my leadership into my identity. I felt very strongly that we had to maintain discipline and we had to do what we were told. But I also felt very strongly about being fair and making sure that we were inclusive. So I reached out to a therapist and started talking to a therapist. And within, I think, the second visit, I had shaved my beard and was talking about hormones. And it just felt right. It was like, holy crap, this is what I've been missing. So I quit my job, moved back to Astoria, started working at the Maritime Museum, and started working on coming out. I retired in November of 2009, and I came out to my wife in September of 2012. I was really freaking out that I was going to lose, well, everybody. So I was really pleasantly surprised when I didn't lose everybody. When I first moved back to Astoria, there was a transgender support group. We do parties. We did our first Pride last year. During my service, I felt pretty isolated from the LGBT community and from support.
When I signed the paperwork for the military, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was still in effect, so I had to sign that slip of paper saying, you know, I will not partake in any homosexual activity. Now we're allowing transgender people to serve in all the branches of the military, and that is huge for me. I decided to join the military because when I was 19 years old and going to community college, I finally came out as trans, and coming from that, you know, Catholic background, I got kicked out and I didn't want to be homeless. The night that I had shared with them that I was transgender, it was the same night that I had gotten in trouble for having my girlfriend over Valentine's Day weekend when they weren't home. I knew I was in trouble, and I was like, well, if I'm already gonna get in trouble, I might as well just come completely out, get it over with now. I'm already in trouble. So, you know, as I'm getting yelled at now by my mom, I was like, I'm transgender. I just openly said it. I didn't even segue in it. I'm transgender, completely changing the subject. She just had this dumbfounded look on her face, wasn't expecting it. She's like, I'm never gonna call you he, you know, you will always be my daughter, you will never be my son. And so I had gotten grounded for 3 months. 3 months had gone by and my grounding was up. And I was like, so Mom, am I off grounding? And she yelled back up, well, your dad and I have actually discussed that. You're not off grounding yet. And we've decided that you can hang out with friends once a week for only an hour. So I quickly ran to my room, grabbed like whatever I had like on the floor and packed it into a bag. And I literally remember having my girlfriend Nicole's number at the time in my pocket and $1. And my mom grabbed my arm, swearing at me left and right, "You're not leaving this house, no, you wanna live here, you have to follow our rules under our roof." And to some extent I can understand that. It is their house, I do have to follow the rules. I don't think the rules were very fair. I said, fine, then I won't follow your rules. I'm out of here. It was a rush of adrenaline through my body, and I don't know how I got past her grip because she had a firm grip on me. Plowed my way through her grip, ran down the stairs, and as I'm opening the door, she goes, "Have a nice," she said the F word, "life." And I said, "Fine, I will," and I slammed the door. I ended up pulling out my girlfriend's phone number out of my pocket, and I called her. I go, "I need help." And so she had come to help me and pick me up and take me to live with her and her parents, and it was a brutal process. It's hard to talk about. I gave her a lot of space. We didn't really talk, didn't communicate. Family gatherings, we'd be in 2 separate rooms for like Christmas or Easter. Being the only daughter at the time, she did have to grieve the loss of her daughter and accept or find some way to accept that I'm no longer her daughter, I'm her oldest son now.
My mama told me when I was young, we're all born superstars. She rolled my hair and put my lipstick on in the glass of her boudoir.
2 years ago, Christmas morning, she finally called me her son. And my jaw about hit the floor. I was like, wow, she finally called me her son, and she's called me her son, and he and Landon ever since. For the first time when I was recovering from top surgery, they finally asked me, "Oh, when's your next show? We'd love to come see you." And I when my mom called me Landon for the first time, it was that same reaction, like, did they both just say they wanted to come see me with the Portland Gay Men? That's never happened.
Baby, I was born this way. Baby, I was born this way. Born this way. Ooh, there ain't no other way. Baby, I was born this way. Right track. Baby, I was born this way. Don't be a drag, just be a queen. Don't be a drag, just be a queen. Don't be a drag, just be a queen. Don't be. Give yourself prudence.
I had this incident happen to me in my unit last April of 2016. I had to out myself to my entire chain of command for this problem to get resolved. I had a higher up officer who's way higher on the food chain than I am barge in the locker room as I'm taping, pointing her finger at me, "You're transgender, aren't you?" and screaming and yelling at me. And there was other people who I didn't know in this locker room, and I'm, right away snapped to the position of attention. I couldn't find any words to come out of my mouth. I mean, words were failing me. I was like, yes, ma'am. I am. Yes, I'm transgendered. And she goes, "I regret to inform you, under the equal opportunity policy that the military has, gender identity and gender expression are not covered. I need to ask you to leave this locker room right now, and you need to go talk to your equal opportunity representative." And so she followed me. I can feel her breathing down the back of my neck until I left that locker room. In April, the policy, it wasn't in effect yet. So I was, walking on eggshells, knowing I could get kicked out of the Army for this. And I went back upstairs to my unit, and I'm in tears at this point. I'm so shaken up, I'm crying. My chaplain sees me, and she was like, "Are you okay, Sergeant Shimmick?" So I told her what had just happened, and she told our first sergeant, told our commander, told our brigade commander, and it just went all the way up, chain of command. After I told them what happened, they're like, "Sergeant Shimmick, you were in the right here. You were following policy, because currently, like I said, policy is I still do have to identify as a female. So using the female restrooms, barracks, uniforms. And so my unit was basically reassuring me, you were in the right, she was in the wrong, and because you're a squared away soldier, we're going to stand behind you, even as a trans member." And long story short, I found out just a few months ago that A, she was openly lesbian, so part of the community, the LGBT community, and 2, she was the commander next door, and 3, she's no longer in the United States Army. She had been discharged. I've decided to take a positive viewpoint on it and not be shaken up and to get out there and share my story so people can hear my voice, and so that doesn't happen to other fellow trans service members, and hopefully I can help them.
The Navy found out I was HIV positive in 1998, and they sit me down and they say, Petty Officer Polk, we have some bad news for you. You're HIV positive. Well, I feigned being surprised. I wanted to say, well, what else is new? And I said, well, what do you want me to do? They said, well, Monday we're going to send you up to Bethesda, Maryland. There's an HIV clinic there on 7 West. So I went up there. No one wanted to treat us. No one wanted, the dentists were in revolt. I had a doctor come in examining me, and he's repeating scriptures, the wages of sin is death, and all this type of bullshit. A lot of us had only lived 2 years. And I met people with no T cells, 4 T cells, 50 T cells. However, when I came in, my T cell count was 1,100, well above normal. And it went up to 1,300. My last 6 months at Great Lakes, I was just there. They took me off assignments. I didn't have a job. They didn't know what to do with me, so they just let me go. They said, well, we will retire you because you only have 2 years to live. I guess people didn't want to work with us because, I got to the point where I'm HIV positive. I'm a black sissy. Who cares? Bring it on. Ostracize me? I made up the word. I was confronted with death. I was 38 years old. You're going to die. That was the frame from everyone, and a lot of us were dying. We're dying. I just closed up shop, and I became addicted to drugs on June 17th of 2000. And even though I had no place to go, I still wanted to use. And I come up here to Portland. It was a God shot. A friend let me stay in his home until I found this apartment and went to school. And then I began to work on myself. I was so full of hate and anger. I hated white folk, what they had done to me. I had to let go of all that hatred and anger and bitterness. That was an evolution. I stopped physically using drugs the 3rd of October of 2008. I just let go. For me, the war is over, if there ever was one. The war is over. The way I think is not the way I thought 10 years ago.
I found it very difficult to take the uniform off. I liked serving my country, as difficult and painful as it had been. I never did find the man I was looking for, but at least I gave it a good try. And it proved to me that I could not find a man, that was not within me. And I came to accept that while I was in the military. I was married to my wife, Nancy. We were together 18 years before. She had metastatic breast cancer for 12 years, and she passed away in Christmas 2012. When my mom died, Dad was absolutely devastated. We went to the funeral home, and the gentleman said, Mr. Campbell, did you serve in the military? And Dad said, yes. He said, I was in the Army for 18 months during World War II. And he said, well, Mr. Campbell, if you would like, your country would like to provide you a gravesite at the Willamette National Cemetery. Your wife Joyce will be buried there, and there will be a headstone, and it will say, Staff Sergeant Gordon Campbell, wife Joyce Campbell, and then whatever words you would like. And Dad said, together forever. And his eyes just lit up. He was so proud and happy that his country would do this for him and that he could do this for her. And that's what we did. And I was, my brothers and I were overjoyed because, this was giving Dad some some peace and some joy and some closure. And at the same time, I felt empty and angry because I was married too. And I'd served my country too, not for 18 months, but for 25 years. And my wife and I could not be buried there. Knowing that Nancy was sick and was going to die, by chance I had a telephone call with Secretary of Labor, Brad Avakian, who was also the highest ranking civil rights representative in the state of Oregon. And in our conversation, I told him how angry I was. I said, I want to be buried up there with my wife like Mom and Dad. And he said, Linda, if you really want to do this, put in the application, but don't send it directly to Washington, D.C. Send it to me, and I'll put a cover letter on it, and we'll send it in. So it started in May. Nancy died in December. Finally, in February of 2013, Commissioner Vakian called and he said, I don't think they're going to answer us. I've got some paperwork here in front of me, and if I sign it, the state of Oregon will be suing the federal government on your behalf. Because in the state of Oregon, everyone is treated equally, and you are not being treated equally. If they will not provide you this honor, the next step will be going to the Supreme Court. He said, so do you want me to sign the letter, or this lawsuit? And I said, yes, I do. We waited 2 weeks, and toward the end of that 2 weeks, I got a phone call from the woman in charge of military burials for the country, and she told me that we'd been approved, and I just fell on my knees. And cried. We had a small burial. Just I think 3 of my friends and Senator Merkley and Brad Avakian. And I'll be buried there too when I die, and it will say, Lieutenant Colonel Linda Campbell, wife Nancy Lindchild, together forever. Just like Mom and Dad. In Oregon, we're all treated equally, and we will be.
I had an amazing mom, my mom Heidi. She grew up in Germany. Here she's speaking with this thick German accent in North Carolina, so she stood out. And because I thought she was this amazing and awesome, I interpreted for her. Sometimes struggling in the military, even in ROTC when I was investigated at first, my mom was there for me of, Monica, if it's meant, then, you will be okay. As when I was in the Air Force and the full-on investigation, and she would say, Monica, they are wrong, and you are right, and you will make it. She always was like, if it doesn't work out, come home, come home. I love you, come home. And the love and strength of my mom, I absolutely knew she would be there for me. And if I had to pack it all up and, move back with her for a minute, she would absolutely get me strong again. I remember when she got cancer, I actually went home to North Carolina for a year and took her to her chemo. And I would pick her up and take her to breakfast, and we'd have coffee and eggs and grits and just laugh and reconnect. I felt it was my time. I finally gave back to her, in return for everything she gave to me. Unfortunately, my mom passed about 7 years ago now, and I feel like while she was alive, I could not have done this story, at least not on camera or in public, because she would have not been safe in North Carolina. Not telling my story earlier, had a lot to do with protecting her. I feel free, happy, proud at this moment to have the opportunity to tell my story now. And I'm so proud today that I wish my mom was here to see this moment. And she would be there for me, and she would have tears in her eyes, and so would I. And I'm just so proud today that I'm sitting here in Portland, Oregon, and this is the first state in the country that's allowing people like me to tell what's in our hearts and be proud.
I had the distinct honor and privilege of going out to dinner one night with the first person in U.S. history, the first out gay person ever to be promoted to the rank of general. Her name is General Tammy Smith. She's an Oregonian, by the way. I said, "What do you like best about being a general?" She says, the best thing in it is so much fun. She says, "I have these coins in my pocket. And whenever I see a soldier do something that's, really incredible," she says, "I go over to that person and I pull this coin out of my pocket and I say, thank you for what you've just done. That was really a great service." She says, "I happen to have one right here in my pocket." She said, "I was planning to present it today to Lieutenant Colonel Linda Campbell for your many years of outstanding service." And I took this coin, and on the back it says, "Don't ask, don't tell. Serving obscured no longer. We are not a nation that says, don't ask, don't tell. We are a nation that says, out of many, we are one." By the way, that's a quote from President Obama. On the front it says, "Serving our country." I thought, I did that. "Serving with pride." I did that. And then it says, "Serving openly and honestly." I never, in 25 years, I never had the chance to do that. I think of Stonewall and how I was a coward and didn't stand up for my rights during Stonewall. I think of the first gay people in the military, like Sergeant Leonard Matlovich. I think of those people and the courage they had and the courage that I didn't have, and I'm ashamed. And I'm just so grateful that the young people today don't have to be ashamed, don't have to break the law to serve their country. I'm pleased to be doing this video so that they know something of their history, because our history is not told. You don't see this in any history books, and the military certainly doesn't talk about it.
I was very excited about the ban being ended. I advocated for ending the ban on transgender service. What I would tell people who are serving right now is you're not alone. I would tell them to be very strong and be very cognizant of what it is they want out of their career, and be ready to fight for it. Because even if the new regulations stay in place, the military is not transliterate, and it's going to take a long time.
And it is still kind of a gray area, because what's going on with the policy, from what I understand now, is from last July 2016 to July 2017. That's kind of where they have to make all the decisions of what bathrooms, barracks, uniforms trans service members will have to wear. They have a year to figure that out, which leaves me in a gray area. By standards and policy, right now, they're still supposed to call me she and her. They don't care. They They call me he and him and treat me like I'm just another fellow soldier, one of their brothers. I just re-enlisted again last July, so I have another 6 years ahead of me within the military. I re-enlisted because I knew my unit is going to stand behind me and support me, and I felt safe, I felt welcomed, and nobody's given me a hard time in my unit. Most of the time they're just like, wow, I would have never guessed that you were trans, you know, born female, but you know, you're living your life, and if it makes you happy, that's all that matters to me, as long as you're happy. Being out here in Portland, Oregon, you know, people are more lenient, you know, compared to as the South, you know, if I was, I would not dare come out as trans in the South because just, you know, religious background and beliefs and such.
I think it's going to take the military a long time to understand how this really affects the service and the different branches of the military. I'm not sure that there is as much buy-in at the top as there needs to be. Most of that training is going to be given by cisgendered white men who really aren't quite altogether sure what the hell they're talking about. Finding veterans who know the culture and can go in and do the training would be a huge step. The problem is they kind of excluded veterans from the lifting of the ban. They specifically wrote exclusions in for veterans to receive surgical assistance. We can get hormones and we can get some support. We can't get surgical support. We can't finish our medical transition using our military insurance or the Veterans Administration. So we're kind of left on our own.
I feel like so much of my life I could not be just 100% proud, out and open as many younger people are today, and that's why I think it's so important for us to keep pushing and hold on to our rights. Don't let changes that have come about in this new year of 2017 take us back to the dark ages of when I served in the military.
If I would give information to a younger trans person who wants to join the military, you know, I would say, if you want to be you, you be you. You know, there are people who are currently serving who are trans and allies who are going to stand behind you. Know that you have support. Know that support's out there. Don't let people scare you. Don't feel like you're going to be bullied. Join.
I sat down and I thought about the things that I have survived. The gauntlet of being black and gay in Gary, Indiana, because the chef life for a sissy was not very long. But to survive that, to survive high school, to wander the streets for 10 years doing absolutely nothing, to join the Navy, to survive that without getting beat up. They still beat up gays and stab them. And to come out and to become a crack addict and to come out of that. I think of all of that. But I'm still here. I am still here. At night when I come home, I turn out all the lights and I measure the day. And I say, well, Miss Lindsay, Miss Thing, that's what I call myself. I say, well, Gwendolyn, have you given more than you've received? And if I've given more, then it's been a good day. It's been a good day.
Now I look back at that young girl who joined, who was 22, and I think, who the heck was she? How could she have done that? It was so awful and so hard, so isolating. I'd go to bed, you know, at night thinking, thank God they didn't find me today. And I'd wake up every morning wondering, is this the day I'm gonna get thrown out? I don't know how she got through it. I thank her all the time. I'm not her anymore, I'm somebody else. I thank her all the time for all the pain that she went through. I'm glad it's not that way for people now. I will fight, I will handcuff myself to the fence around the White House before I let them take this right away from young people today. They have the right to serve with dignity in who they are, and I will do everything. I will not have them take that right away.
What I would say to those veterans who couldn't serve openly for being who they are is, you know, while it's unfortunate that they couldn't serve or got kicked out or whatever their story was, you know, they did pave the way. So for that, I would say thank you, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be where I'm at today in the military.